Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Phenomenal game in Tuscaloosa. Alabama holding on. And Dill, I kind of want to take a look at both of these teams and kind of what we learned from this football game. And I think from an Alabama perspective, you like to have your back against the wall in the fourth quarter and come out on top. But I think if you're an Alabama fan, like you fully understand that there's a lot more you need from this team if you want to compete for a national championship in 2024. I think primarily on the defensive side of the football. And if you're South Carolina, I think South Carolina fans might hate to hear this, but this team is so close. Like you look at that loss against LSU, you look at that loss against Alabama and say, there are so many aspects of this team that I really like about South Carolina. I can tell this program's going in the right direction, but when you have the holes that South Carolina has, like it's really hard to close out football games. And I think most notably the offensive line continues to really struggle in pass protection. Lenore Sellers continues to make some of those mistakes that cost you football games. But there are some aspects that we're going to talk about that if you're a South Carolina fan, like you can really build on throughout the rest of 2024, fired up to get into this one. Now, before we do, and as always, whether you're an Alabama fan, South Carolina fan, just some college football fans watching this football game, would love to hear your biggest takeaways in the comment section. The support's been amazing. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, I'll give you the T-box. Let's start with the victors. Alabama. Biggest takeaways from Alabama coming out of this football game here.
One major thing I think you're starting to really get encouraged by is Jalen Milroe's ability to hit that short intermediate passing game. Because that was something so big we talked about coming in, where last year it just never really existed. I don't think he ever found any consistency. A, I think he's running the ball a little bit better, but B, I think the main thing is his ability to kind of work just a basic passing attack and be really, really consistent for the most part. I think you're really starting to get encouraged by it.
100% agree with that. Like this offense last year in the passing attack seemed to be so one-dimensional. Like if we weren't pushing the ball 20 plus yards down the field, we weren't moving the football. Jalen Milroe is much more comfortable. I think also a little bit more comfortable processing. And like, yeah, he made some mistakes that kind of reminded you of the 2023 season. But you can tell this kid is taking a step. And again, I think there's a legit chance we're looking at the best quarterback that we see.
In fairness, that first interception, I don't know that that's entirely on him. I mean, the coach has really put him in it's a really odd spot to kind of take a chance there, if you will.
Wild.
Like, honestly, Milroe kind of had to do something, couldn't take a sack, trying to make a play.
I guess you could take a sack, but like there was 9 seconds left. It's 3rd and 15 or something, and you're like,
was brutal.
Yeah, it was really, really weird. And then the safety, obviously, trying to do a little bit too much, kind of got caught. Again, there are mistakes that you want to see Jalen Milroe clean up. He certainly did not play a perfect football game, but I'm with you. Like, if you were to start with some positives, it really is Jalen Milroe continuing to be a little bit better of a processor, to operate the short intermediate route trees a lot better than he did in 2024. Again, there's a lot of ways that this Alabama defense or offense can attack an opposing defense. And this was
a lot of different weapons. I think you look at the pass catchers. I mean, Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams have kind of been doing it, but you see guys like Cole Adams now step up, and I think you'll like the weapons, if you will, and the skill sets and how they complement each other. I mean, Cole Adams working out of the slot, Bernard and Williams playing really good on the boundary. I think this wide receiver position is kind of coming together. And a lot of it, frankly, is Ryan Williams being that number one guy that they can go to and be their alpha. But I think the kind of like guys who are filling in behind him are making more plays than, frankly, I would have thought they would.
That was the biggest question mark about this Alabama offense. Like, look, every single statistical metric you want to look at Alabama's, but even going back to that Vanderbilt game they lost, averaged 9 yards per play. Like, this Alabama offense has been elite to start 2024. If there was one knock, it was, are we too one-dimensional, leaning on Ryan Williams? You started to see some other playmakers kind of step up. I thought that was a really big takeaway. One of the things that I was kind of thinking about heading into this game, and I think it played out that way, is this was always going to be kind of a tough matchup for the Alabama offense. Because, again, Alabama, even though Jalen Milroe has made steps in the short intermediate portion of the football field, they want to push the ball down the field. Two of the things that South Carolina's done a really good job of is, one, not giving up the explosive play. They were very good against that, against an Ole Miss team that wants to do the same exact thing, and they can get after the passer. And so you saw Alabama not go to as many deeper third shots because, one, the pass rush for the South Carolina defense is elite. But South Carolina also on the back end played like that second interception from O'Donnell Fortune.
It's really
That
good.
was just a savvy, incredible play. Like I can't even blame Jalen Milroe for throwing that interception there.
Yeah,
Now,
like if you're getting real nitpicky, you like want the ball forced in there and driven in there a little bit
yeah,
harder. But at the end of the day, you're kind of right. That's just really good ball.
yeah, he literally came out of nowhere. Now, what do you got to clean up? I think it's pretty clear. It's on the defensive side of the football. I mean, the South Carolina offense and the South Carolina fans would be the first ones to tell you, like, we don't have a ton of confidence in this offense, right? It struggles to hold up in pass protection. Lenore Sellers hasn't been a consistent downfield passer so far in 2024, but they were almost able to go over 400 total yards. Dill, I think losing Damani Jackson for duration of that game certainly hurt because you look at Alabama. Damani Jackson's been great for Alabama to start. It's a young secondary that's relatively you're young and you're new. Like you got a lot of new faces and got a lot of young talent. You saw some of those zone coverages break down a little bit. I think this is an Alabama defense that wants to play a little bit more man. That's at least what they did against Vanderbilt pretty consistently. They went to a little bit more zone. Didn't think the zone coverage was as tight as you would like to see if you're Alabama here.
No, I think if you're Alabama and you look at giving up that many yards to Lenore Sellers, I mean, 238, that he's not a guy who,
Yeah.
again, you kind of said it. This just hasn't been a good passing attack for South Carolina. They can't really block, obviously. That's a huge issue. But
Yes.
again, the weapons aren't incredible. I think some of the young guys, Mazeo Bennett's made some plays for him, but I don't think you have a stable of weapons that you have a ton of confidence in. And for Lenore Sellers to, for chunks of that game, kind of be able to do, I don't want to say do what he wanted, but like cut him up through the air a little bit, I certainly think is disappointing. And it's now continuing a bit of a trend now. Vanderbilt, again, they didn't throw for a zillion yards, but when they needed big plays through the air, they were able to get them. You obviously saw Georgia in that second half. So I think you're right. Like this secondary, we kind of knew would take some time to gel a lot of young players, but it's got to come together a little bit quicker than it probably is.
Yeah, Kane Womack, I think, has his work cut out for him. And again, if you're Kane Womack, like you're lucky, you're on the opposite of an offense that's scoring a lot of points. But this is probably the worst Alabama defense we've seen in quite a long time, if we're being honest.
And I also think they need more guys in the interior of their defensive line to just play better football. You look at how much room Rocket Sanders had to run the ball and how many creases he had open to him. I think, again, when you look at what the South Carolina offensive line is, it's not been a unit that's been consistent in that regard either. And they had a fair amount of just like churning up yards a little bit. And that another thing that I think you're just
they stayed on schedule. There wasn't a ton of negative plays created. Like you look at that number 7-15 on third downs for South Carolina. That's because they did a really good job not being behind the chains all that often in this football game. And you saw, I think, the best example is that first drive of the second half where South Carolina is just methodically moving the football, and you're not really able to get South Carolina off script, off schedule. That if you're Alabama, especially playing
more guys like playing like Quandarius Robinson, I think he's playing
yes.
so well. He's so disruptive. He's such a good pass rusher. But I look at everyone else, I think their level needs to come up. And I think especially on the inside, they need to start making more plays because it's not a horrible unit. Tim Smith, Keenan, those guys are good players, but they need someone to be a little bit more disruptive because I think you're right. They're letting teams stay on schedule. They let Vanderbilt do it for a fair amount of that game. Now they let Scar do it for a good chunk of this game. And these just aren't good enough offenses to like, I think what Alabama would want to see the way they're playing defense against.
Yeah, now you flip to South Carolina, and again, I think it comes down to you turn the ball over 4 times in this football game. It's hard to beat Alabama on the road when you turn the ball over 4 times, and some of the turnovers were just like disgusting. Like you can't have those plays. Now, again, if for South Carolina, the story is it's just a roster that's not complete. You have some really good aspects. I think this defense in general is playing some really, really good football. Now they're playing opposite an offense that's struggling to stay on the field. It's turning the football over. Dill, Alabama had 313 total yards in this football game. You should be winning this football game 10 times out of 10 with that metric. The problem was turnovers, but I think more importantly, you look at the offense and the problems. Yeah, Lenore Sellers, it's clear that he's a youngster. He's making some mistakes. I think more importantly, this offensive line is a disaster. Josiah Thompson, I know, true freshman left tackle, going through some growing pains. I think this kid's going to be a really good football player. But if you're Shane Beamer, are you telling me we don't have a more competitive left tackle right now that gives us a better chance to win? this South that's I guess where it starts for me. And you see the young talent on this football team, but there's so many holes that you see. It's hard to overcome when you have this many kind of glaring question marks within the South Carolina offense here.
The issue is it's not like, again, there's teams that don't have great offensive lines that I think can be competitive. Like, I don't think Ole Miss has a great offensive line, but it's a competitive enough unit to like not be the reason they lose games right now. And for the past 2 years, which certainly would be very frustrating. And I like the direction South Carolina's offensive line is moving. I think they have more talent coming in. They've
Oh
recruited
yeah.
the position pretty well. And you see like Josiah Thompson, I think, is going to be a good left tackle at some point. There's just too much talent in him. But I think you're right. Right now, they're playing at such a level where, again, with a quarterback who's a little bit prone to making mistakes on his own in an offensive line that is pretty much a sieve for most of the part when they're playing really good teams, that's really becoming a volatile combo where they're starting to they are losing games for that reason. They have a quarterback who, again, doesn't always have the most composure because he's obviously a redshirt freshman in offensive line. That certainly doesn't know favors.
Yeah. I look at
But
South
everything
Carolina.
else is like kind of good, which is the frustrating part. So
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we talk about this all the time, specifically in this conference. It's hard to win football games when you're not a complete team. You're going to get exposed. And I think that's kind of what happened with South Carolina. Even going back to Ole Miss, like that was kind of the big sticking point. Like Ole Miss had more than 10 negative plays created. Can't have that. Again, Alabama, stuff to clean up. Nice to get a win. South Carolina, frustrating loss, but there's a lot to like about the South Carolina team. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.